The first sign that something was wrong didn't come from a driver. It came from a mechanic, a veteran shop owner in Phoenix, 30 years turning wrenches, the kind of man who could rebuild a V8 blindfolded and tell you what was wrong with an engine just by the rhythm of its idle. One morning in the mid-1980s, a tow truck dropped off a sedan outside his garage. The car looked ordinary: beige paint, vinyl seats, a family car, the kind you'd see in every suburban driveway across America. But when the mechanic opened the hood, he paused. Then he slowly closed it again. According to the tow driver, the engine had stalled 3 times on the freeway, then smoke, then silence. The mechanic wiped his hands on a rag and shook his head. "I'm not touching that motor." Within 2 years, mechanics across the United States would start saying the exact same thing. Shops quietly refused the cars. Dealership technicians avoided them. And tow truck drivers learned something strange. If the car had that engine, the repair bill might cost more than the car itself. But the real question wasn't why mechanics feared the motor. The real question was, how did it ever make it onto the road in the first place? Because this engine didn't start as a disaster. It started as a promise. A billion-dollar promise. The late 1970s were brutal for American automakers. Gas prices had exploded. Lines stretched around city blocks. Families who once worshipped big V8 power were suddenly calculating miles per gallon like their lives depended on it. And in Detroit boardrooms, executives felt the ground shifting beneath them. Japanese manufacturers were rising fast. Compact cars were selling. Fuel economy wasn't just a marketing term anymore. It was survival. Inside one corporate headquarters, engineers were handed a mission that sounded simple: build an engine that would save the American car. Something powerful enough for U.S. highways, but efficient enough to satisfy a public terrified of another oil crisis. It had to be revolutionary, something bold, something that would prove American engineering could out-innovate anyone in the world. And when the first prototypes rolled into the testing facility, the engineers believed they had done it. The numbers looked incredible: fuel economy that shocked executives, performance that beat expectations. If the projections were right, this engine could save hundreds of millions of gallons of fuel a year. For the company behind it, the potential payoff was staggering: billions in future sales, dominance in a new market, and bragging rights in an industry where reputation meant everything. But deep inside the engineering team, there were whispers, small concerns, tiny problems, things that might become serious later. Except later wasn't acceptable, because corporate pressure was building. Competitors were launching new models, shareholders wanted results, and development delays cost money, millions per month. So meetings grew tense, deadlines tightened. Some engineers argued the engine needed more testing, others insisted the design was sound. Executives asked a simpler question: can we sell it? The answer eventually became yes. Production began. Factories retooled, assembly lines shifted, advertising campaigns rolled out across television screens and glossy magazine pages. This wasn't just a new engine, it was the future. Dealerships proudly displayed the cars on showroom floors. Salesmen talked about efficiency, innovation, and American ingenuity. Families bought them, thousands at first, then tens of thousands. On highways across the United States, the new engines hummed quietly under the hoods of fresh cars. For a moment, everything looked like a success. Then the breakdown started. At first, the complaints were small: engines that ran rough, cars that stalled unexpectedly, strange knocking sounds drivers couldn't explain. Dealership service departments handled the issues like any other warranty work: adjustments, replacements, software tweaks. But the complaints didn't stop, they multiplied. Owners reported engines failing with shockingly low mileage. Some died before reaching 20,000 miles. Others locked up on long highway drives. A few simply refused to restart after being shut off. And mechanics began noticing something else. The repairs were getting complicated, unusually complicated. The engine design that had looked so clever on paper was becoming a nightmare in the real world. Parts were difficult to reach. Components interacted in strange ways. One small failure could cascade through the entire system. A simple repair turned into a multi-day job. Independent repair shops began quietly turning customers away, not because they didn't want the work, because they couldn't guarantee the fix. Meanwhile, inside the company, warranty costs were rising fast. Every failed engine meant thousands of dollars in repairs. Multiply that by thousands of cars, and suddenly the revolutionary motor looked less like a breakthrough and more like a financial black hole. But the worst moment came on a hot afternoon outside Dallas. A family sedan cruising down Interstate 20. The driver noticed the temperature gauge climbing, then smoke, then a violent shudder from beneath the hood. The engine seized. The car rolled to the shoulder. Moments later, flames erupted. Investigators later said the failure triggered a catastrophic chain reaction inside the engine. The story made local news, then national headlines. Drivers began asking questions, consumer advocates started investigating, and lawyers started calling. Within months, lawsuits began appearing in courtrooms across multiple states. Owners claimed the engines were defective. Some demanded buybacks. Others demanded compensation. Dealerships were overwhelmed. Mechanics struggled to keep up with repair orders. And slowly, something strange began happening in garages across America. Technicians developed a reputation for the engine, a reputation that spread through word of mouth. If one rolled into the shop, experienced mechanics groaned. Younger techs refused to work on them. Some service managers assigned the jobs only to their most senior staff. Because fixing the engine wasn't just difficult, it was risky. One wrong step, one overlooked component, and the repair could fail again within weeks, which meant angry customers, warranty disputes, and long nights arguing with corporate support lines. Meanwhile, the company that built the engine faced a nightmare scenario. Public trust was eroding, sales were dropping, and competitors were watching closely. In Detroit, rival executives reportedly joked that the engine had become the most expensive marketing campaign their competition had ever run. But inside the company responsible, there were no jokes. Internal memos revealed growing panic. Engineering teams scrambled to redesign components. Service bulletins were issued. Dealership technicians received emergency training. But the core problem remained. The engine's design had flaws that couldn't be easily fixed, and every month, more engines failed. The breaking point came during a massive internal review meeting. Executives gathered around a long conference table. Financial projections were displayed on a screen. Warranty costs, legal exposure, brand damage. One executive reportedly asked a brutal question: "How much longer can we pretend this works?" The answer stunned the room. If nothing changed, the engine could cost the company billions, not millions. Billions. The decision came quietly. Production would stop. Future models would receive redesigned powertrains. Dealerships would handle repairs as best they could. But there would be no massive recall, no dramatic public apology. The company hoped the problem would slowly fade away. Instead, the opposite happened. Owners felt abandoned. Mechanics grew even more frustrated and used car values for vehicles with the engine collapsed. Some cars lost half their value within a year. In junkyards across the country, rows of nearly new vehicles appeared. Perfect bodies, spotless interiors, but engines that no one wanted to touch. The fallout rippled across the industry. Rival manufacturers used the disaster as a cautionary tale. Engineering teams began pushing harder against rushed development schedules. And within corporate boardrooms, a new phrase quietly entered the conversation: "Don't let this become another one of those engines." Yet something strange happened as time passed. The cars disappeared from roads, the lawsuits settled, the headlines faded. But the legend of the motor remained. Mechanics told stories about them, stories of impossible repairs, stories of engines that failed in ways no one expected, stories about cars that returned to the shop again, and again, and again. Even today, decades later, a few of those vehicles still exist. Hidden in barns, parked in dusty garages, occasionally appearing at auctions or classic car meets. And when someone lifts the hood, veteran mechanics still recognize the design immediately. They lean closer, study the engine bay, then shake their heads the same way that Phoenix mechanic did years ago, because they remember what happened. The lawsuits, the stranded drivers, the billions of dollars that evaporated. But there's still one mystery that hasn't fully disappeared. A question that lingers among former engineers and industry historians. Because in later interviews, some engineers hinted at something unexpected. According to a few of them, the original prototype engines actually worked. In early testing, they performed beautifully. Efficient, reliable, innovative, which raises a haunting possibility. What if the design itself wasn't the real problem? What if the real failure happened somewhere else? In a rushed deadline, a cost-cutting decision, a manufacturing shortcut, or a corporate meeting where someone said two words that changed everything: "Ship it." Because sometimes the most dangerous machine ever built isn't the one that explodes. It's the one that leaves the factory before it's ready, and somewhere out there, under the hood of a forgotten sedan, that motor still exists, waiting for the next brave mechanic to decide whether it's worth touching.